Traditionally, we commemorate the death of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the first Imam. So history tells us that on the morning of the 19th, that would be this morning at Fajr time, he was struck down by the Mujah. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about him and then narrating his story of his death. And then I'm going to share with you his last testament that he gave to his family and something he wanted to communicate to the rest of us as well as the Shia. So these occasions like this, when we're supposed to commemorate the Imams, it reminds us of something. Sometimes we think of our Prophet and our Imams as teachers. And it's true, they're teachers. But a regular teacher or a regular kind of a messenger, their job is just to convey some idea to you and leave you with the idea and then they go. Right? So if someone gives you a message to convey to you, I can bring the message to you, I hand it over, and I go, and whatever's written in the message, that's what's meant for you to read and follow. If we think of the prophets and the imams like this, that's an injustice to them though. Because it's not just the message that they're conveying that's important. Right? If we have this idea that the prophet's job is basically to bring the Quran to us, he brings that Quran to us and then he goes, all we need is the Quran. Right? That's not right. That's not the right conception. As Shia especially, that's not how we understand the prophet's role. His job is not only to receive the Quran from God and then give it to us, convey it to us, but his job just starts there. Then he's got to teach it to us, explain it to us. He's got to embody it himself, live it, show us what it means to live a life of the Quran. And then he's got to use that as a standard to run society, to build a society on, judge disputes with, right? So it's got to be a whole practical kind of guidance of how he receives and teaches, then implements and demonstrates how that Quran is supposed to be lived. That's still not the end of his message or the end of our relationship with him. Right? The Prophet and the Imams, they themselves as people are important. It's not only important that we believe in what they taught, but we need to also make a direct connection with them and have that connection with them as something important for us. And these commemorations, when we talk about their births, especially their deaths, that's a chance for us to do that, to connect with them as people. Sometimes people, as followers, will say it's history, it's old information, it's stuff we've heard before. But it's an ongoing relationship that we're building. When we tell these stories, when we rehash these stories, right, we're reconnecting with that personality, building that connection again with them, and making sure that we're involved with them and they're involved with us. Yesterday we talked about the hardness of the heart, how sometimes people get into a position where their hearts become hard. And we talked about what that means. That emotionally you become insensitive, or you become so arrogant and so complacent that you're not willing to bend to the truth or accept the truth. And one of the ways that we can soften our hearts and make sure that they stay soft is by connecting with the Ahlul Bayt. Allah has given them a particular disposition, a particular position. They lived a life of suffering. Right? They're outstanding people, always heroes, always doing the right thing, but they're constantly wronged by the people around them. They weren't appreciated. They were sidelined. What was rightfully theirs was taken from them. But iconically, they persevered. They were always those heroic figures. And so it becomes really easy for us as their followers to connect with them emotionally. Right? Crying for the Ahlul Bayt it's actually a very easy thing. It's not that Allah has given us some people who are wealthy and powerful and lived happy lives in a worldly sense, and then said to have an emotional connection with them. It would be very hard to do that. Right? But people who have suffered, people who have experienced the kind of tragedy they experience, it's very easy for us to connect with them, to cry for them. And the more we can do that, the softer our hearts will become. Not only towards them, but then towards each other, because we're all followers of those same Imams and same Prophet. And then towards the rest of the creation as well. The martyrdom of Imam Ali, there's a saying by one of our scholars. He says that, he's talking about Imam Hussein. He says, when was Imam Hussein killed? Right? 61 after the Hijrah in Karbala, right? But this historian, he tells us, no, Imam Hussein was killed at Saqifa. Saqifa, is that name familiar to you? Like, Saqifa is this incident that took place after the Prophet's death in Medina. Right, the Prophet died in the year 11 of the Hijrah. Right, Imam Hussein died in 61. So the scholar is saying that actually Imam Hussein died like 50 years ahead. Right? What he means, so Saqifa, let me just tell you what that is. Saqifa was this incident where the Prophet had just passed away. He was barely even buried, maybe not even buried yet. Some of the Medinan Muslims, what they call the Ansar, the helpers of the Prophet, they got together and they had this meeting in this place called Saqifa. Saqifa is like a pavilion, has a roof and no walls. So they met there and they were discussing who should be the leader, what should we do now, the Prophet's gone, how should we organize ourselves. As they're meeting, Abu Bakr and Umar and Abu Ubaidah, these three of the Meccans who were also in Medina, right? Meccans who had emigrated. So these three crashed this meeting. And very quickly they turned the whole thing around, and instead of it being a local kind of Medinan meeting, just to discuss things amongst themselves, these guys hijack it and they say that no, actually, we as Quraysh, as people who accepted Islam earlier than you all, we should be the rulers. And something happens, and Abu Bakr ends up becoming the chosen Khalifa out of all of these people in that Saqifa. And so the scholar says that when that happened, right, Imam Hussein was a few years old at that time. Right, he's 3, 4, 5 years old at that time. So just after the Prophet passed away. The scholar says that actually Imam Hussein died on that day. And what he means by that is that the chain of events that led to Karbala and allowed for the son of the Prophet, the grandson of the Prophet, to be able to be killed at Karbala, that whole chain of events, that sequence of events started the day when people decided that God's choice for them as a leader was not good enough. God had chosen Imam Ali to be the successor to the Prophet. And he had every credential for that. He was the oldest Muslim, the best Muslim, the smartest, the most knowledgeable, smartest, bravest, every virtue you can think of. The Prophet had it in the highest degree, and Imam Ali had it just under him in the next degree. So he was fully qualified for everything. But for different reasons, people felt like, no, that choice it wasn't a wise choice of God or the Prophet. Imam Ali's too young, for instance. We have people who are older. Abu Bakr is the age of the Prophet, right? He's 53, 63 at this time, right? So he's the same age as the Prophet. Imam Ali he's 30 years younger. That's also an interesting way to keep track of Imam Ali's age. He lived exactly 63 years as well, just like the Prophet lived 63 years. But he's exactly 30 years younger than the Prophet, right? So at the time that the Prophet's death, Imam Ali is 33. As I said, he's too young. Or more importantly, people had grudges against him. Right? Because Imam Ali was always in the forefront of battle. The Prophet he was fighting at Badr, or fighting at Uhud, all these different battles that he fought against the pagans, against the mushrikeen, or against other people who were trying to crush the Muslims. Imam Ali would be there. He was a standard bearer. He was the one who would be on the forefront of battle. And what happened was that he ended up killing many of the prominent leaders of Mecca. Right, so think of Abu Jahl and Umayyah, and some of these prominent figures that you might have heard of their names. The ones who were the leaders of the pagans in Mecca, Imam Ali was responsible for killing them. And their sons and their nephews and their grandsons had become Muslim, but they couldn't let go of that grudge they had against the killer of their father or grandfather. Even though they were pagans, and they were supposed to be killed because they refused to accept the truth of the Prophet. Imam Ali didn't do anything wrong. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, exactly what the Prophet wanted him to do. But they held this grudge. And so for those people to then accept Imam Ali as their ruler was too hard for them to swallow. Right? In Ziyarat Ashura, we call down Allah's la'an, Allah's damnation on those people who start this ball rolling. I mentioned this sequence of events. It started at Saqifa. So the day when people decided that actually I know better, the Prophet made a mistake, God made a mistake, and the appointed ruler that God appointed, he's not good enough for me. I think I am equally qualified. In fact, I'm better qualified. I'm more senior, I'm this or that. As soon as they started thinking like that and they got people to buy into that, that means that God no longer has authority. That means that the credentials of the descendants of the Prophet, the family of the Prophet, that no longer matters. People start to think that they are equal to them, even superior to them. They're equal candidates. Right, once that happens, that position of the Ahlul Bayt is no longer there, and other people can easily plug themselves in and imagine that they are now the successors to the Prophet, and they can sideline the family of the Prophet, generation after generation. So it happens, so that scholar was talking about Imam Hussein. Once that happens, then it becomes easy to see the chain of events where you can have regular old people who, were companions of the Prophet. They become khulafa, and they hold on to some parts of the Prophet's teachings, change some parts. But then you can have someone like Muawiyah, right, the son of the staunchest enemy of the Prophet, who himself never converted to Islam until the very last moment when he had no choice but to convert. He now becomes the Khalifa, the ruler of all Muslims. Right? Muawiyah becomes the ruler. Right? It becomes easy to see how that's possible. And then his son, Yazid, right, who has all the qualities of an enemy of Islam, who has none of the qualities of the Prophet, someone who has no piety, no belief in God, no belief in the Prophet, who sins openly. Right? The kinds of sins that are attributed to him are embarrassing to even talk about. Right? Having relations with family members, playing with dogs and monkeys, and like drinking wine, and just like the kind of things that you associate with the loosest of people, the most immoral people, and rulers of most of the world. And that's what he was. And he now claims to be the successor of the Prophet and the ruler of all Muslims. And he's the one who is then able to kill Imam Hussein. The sequence of events then that starts with Saqifa, sidelining the Ahlul Bayt, replacing them with people who were apparently virtuous, had some virtue, weren't terrible people necessarily. But then it opens the door for people who are actually terrible and evil and immoral to come in their place. And then people get confused and say, well, he's the king. Anyone who rises up against the king is evil and must be crushed. Even if it's Hussein, even if he's the grandson of the Prophet, well, he's rebelling against the king, so we should fight against him and suppress him and even kill him. And you end up with Imam Hussein being killed afterwards. You can say a similar thing about Imam Ali alayhi salam. Right? Imam Ali alayhi salam, he's killed in the year 41 in Ramadan on a morning like today. But that whole chain of events again starts with Saqifa. Right? When people thought that they could sideline Imam Ali alayhi salam and replace him and stand in his place, right, that led to a chain of events that eventually leads to his death. More immediately, the people who killed Imam Ali alayhi salam, they were known as Khawarij. The Khawarij were people who actually were his allies and his soldiers. Right, Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he became the Khalifa finally, right, just kind of in a very brief way, 3 people ruled after the Prophet before Imam Ali came to power. Abu Bakr, and then Umar, and then Uthman. Each one was increasingly distant from the Prophet's teachings. When it came time for Uthman to rule, who ruled quite 11 years, right, he was someone who made people so angry that they poured in from outlying cities, from Egypt and from Syria and different places into Medina, and they ended up killing him. Because what he was doing was so far from the principles of Islam. He started appointing his own family members to high positions, only because they were his relatives, not because they had any virtue. In fact, some of the people he appointed to positions were people who the Prophet had banished from Medina and said, never set foot in here again. And now Uthman brings them back because it's his cousin or it's his brother and this and that. And he brings them back and then gives them positions as governors and leaders of different cities in the Muslim lands. So it got to such an extent that people came and they assassinated Uthman. When Imam Ali took over, he ruled for about 5 years. That's all that he ended up getting before he was killed himself. During that time, he had to wage a few battles. First against some rebels from amongst the companions of the Prophet. Right? Some of the closest companions of the Prophet who had stuck by Imam Ali's side from the beginning, they now felt like, now finally we've achieved what we've always wanted. You are in power, well, we've been your supporters, so where's our cut? What do we get for having supported you? And they wanted to rule over this city or that city, so they wanted something out of it selfishly. Imam Ali said, no, I'm not going to that's not the way I work. I'm not Uthman and these other people where I give special favors to family or friends or anyone. It's based on merit, it's based on my decisions, and I'm not going to do this for him. When he did that, they rebelled against him. They mounted an army and they waged war against him in the Battle of the Camel. Once the Battle of the Camel was waged and he ended up defeating them, the next challenge he faced was Muawiyah. And Muawiyah is the ruler of Syria. He's supposed to be a governor under the caliph, right? But he starts to make claims that no, I'm supposed to be the ruler. I'm supposed to be the ruler of all the Muslims. And so Imam Ali wages war against him. In his army, amongst the soldiers that fight with him, they are not happy with the way that battle ends. And they themselves wage another rebellion. So his own soldiers, they wage a rebellion against Imam Ali alayhi salam. They're known as the Khawarij. So fast forward a few years, the Khawarij are the ones who end up with this attitude that all of the problems that we have as Muslims, all the corruption, all the evil that's happening in the Ummah is because of the rulers that we have. And they pinned it on three people in particular: Imam Ali, Muawiyah, and Amr ibn al-As. Again, you see, they couple these three people together. Amr ibn al-As, who's the mastermind of every kind of treachery and every kind of betrayal you could think of, like him and Muawiyah, who I mentioned before, they think of those two people and Imam Ali in the same category, that these three are the source of all of our troubles. And so there are three individuals, Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam, and a guy named Burak, and a guy named Amr. They come together in Mecca, in front of the Kaaba, and they say, we're going to solve the problems of the Muslims once and for all. Let's kill these three people. And so they make a plan that on this particular day, in the 41st year of the Hijrah, in the month of Ramadan, on the morning of the 19th, all three of us will go to Amr ibn al-As in Egypt, to Muawiyah in Syria, and to Ali in Kufa, and at the same time, at Fajr time, we'll strike them all down. Unfortunately, the two that were supposed to kill the other two, Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As, they fail. And they're caught before they're able to do it, and they end up being executed. Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam, he comes to Kufa. He aligns with some of the other enemies of Imam Ali who live there in Kufa with him. He goes to this one woman named Qatan, and he proposes to her. He's about to embark on this assassination attempt, almost certain death, but he takes a liking to this woman, and so he approaches her and says, I know Ali has, he was the cause of the death of your father and your brother and some other members of your family. I know you hate him. I'm here to propose to you. So she turns around and says, I have a couple of conditions. I'll marry you, but there's a certain amount of money that you have to give me as the bridal gift. And the second thing I want is I want the head of Ali alayhi salam. If you kill him, I'll marry you. So he says, that's exactly, as fortune would have it, that's exactly why I came here, and that's perfect. I was going to do this anyway, and if I can have your hand in marriage, then that's perfect. And she says, if you fail and they catch you or kill you, then you'll be a martyr and you'll have much better than me in paradise. And this is the way they're thinking. And they think that they're right and everyone else is wrong. They're self-righteous, and these are people, the Khawarij, they're people, if you and I were to see them, we would think they're outstanding Muslims. We say, MashaAllah, you're someone who never misses a prayer, you follow Islam to a T, you know the Quran inside and out. Like, this is the kind of people they were, outstanding in all the superficial aspects. But they had this arrogance within them, where they felt like we are right and everyone else is wrong. Anyone who deviates in any way from what we believe, they're evil, they should be killed, they're bound for hell. And it's actually our duty to kill them. So this alliance is made. Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam and this Qatan, they do what's called i'tikaf. You know what i'tikaf is? So oftentimes during the end of Ramadan, for 3 days or more, people will camp out in the masjid. You go to a masjid, you make an intention to do i'tikaf. You're basically in a seclusion, just to devote yourself to worship. So they do this. Qatan sets up a tent in the masjid, and Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam also camps out there, and he awaits the time when he's going to strike Imam Ali. He's poisoned the sword, and he basically sleeps there in the masjid day and night, waiting for the morning to come. On the morning of the 19th, Imam Ali Islam, he would wake up early for Salatul Layl, and he would walk to the masjid and wake up everyone, pray his prayers, wake up everyone in the masjid, give the adhan, and then lead the prayers, and then go back home. So he does that like he usually does. He comes to the masjid, it's still before Fajr time. He sees that all the people are sleeping in the masjid, he wakes them up. Even Abdurrahman ibn Muljam, he wakes him up, makes sure that he's ready for prayer. And then Imam Ali goes to the front of the masjid, gives the adhan, and is ready for prayers. So we're told that when he stands for Fajr, he begins Fajr and starts reciting Fatiha and the second surah. And in the middle of the second surah, Abdurrahman ibn Muljam, he steps out of line and he wields the sword and he strikes Imam Ali on the head. The sword was poisoned. The blow came suddenly. Imam Ali's words as he struck down is famously, "Khuztu wa Rabbil Ka'bah." He had this long desire to be a martyr. Right? It's hard for us to imagine. In the dua that we read tonight, there's a phrase that says that we pray to Allah that our death be a death in His way. Right? But I don't think we nearly, often enough think about that. Maybe we think about our death, maybe, even that's very, very infrequent. But to think about how we're going to die, that's something very special. Right? How is it possible? We know death is going to come. And usually our concern is how can we prevent death? How can we delay death? What health precautions can I take? What medicines can I take? What insurance should I take out? We think about those kinds of things. But what we should really be thinking about is how can I die in a way that will serve the greatest good? If I die doing something useless, then that's a waste. I'm going to die anyway. If I'm dying sinning against Allah, if I'm dying without even the concept of God in my mind, the thought of God in my mind, then it's a useless sort of a death. But if I can live a life that's in constant service of God, where everything I do is a sacrifice for Him, everything I do, I'm thinking about Him and what does He want from me. If I can live that kind of a life, then death is definitely going to come. Whenever it comes, it's likely to strike me down when I'm in the service of God. And then my death can be something that's worthwhile to God. It could be the death of a martyr. And so Imam Ali alayhi salam and his companions, the other Imams, their constant prayer was to die as martyrs. Not that they were suicidal, not that they wanted their lives to end. They lived, they fought bravely. But they knew death had to come and they wanted their death to be in God's service. And so it's this constant wish. Every battle would be fought with the Prophet. Badr passed and Uhud passed, and every battle would pass, and he would still be standing in the end. And he was happy that there was victory, but he'd also be sad that my time hasn't come yet. All these other, our companions and our comrades, they've all fallen in battle as martyrs. I wish I could also be one of them. And so when he finally is struck down, his words are, finally I've achieved success. Finally I've attained the goal that I've lived my whole life for. I've been struck down by an enemy of God in an act of worship of God, in service of God. And this is exactly what I've always desired. After he was struck down, Ibn Muljam was caught before he could get very far. Imam Hassan steps in and leads the prayers, finishes the prayers so that can be fulfilled, and then they take Imam Ali Islam home. He ends up surviving for a few days. He's struck down on the 19th. He doesn't end up dying until the 21st. During this time, he has an opportunity to gather his family around him and give a last testament. And this is what I want to finish up by sharing with you. Recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala. So imagine a deathbed. Right? I think again, oftentimes when we think of death, we think of the kinds of death that we usually either experience ourselves or we see in movies and whatnot. Usually what happens is someone drops dead, or there's an accident or a shooting or something like that, and then once emergency services is called in, they kind of crowd out people and they end up taking over. And so the last experience that this person has before they die is EMS and doctors and nurses and all these people around them, no family, no spiritual consolation, no reminders. But a way to die that would be, that we should hope for and wish for, is to die in a way where we have some time to reaffirm our faith, where we have a time to repent and clear our record, and we have time to speak to the ones around us and give them some last advice, ask them for some last prayers, these kinds of things. Imam Ali alayhi salam was blessed with this. Right? So he's lying in bed in his home in Kufa. He gathers around him all of his family. So his son Imam Hassan, his son Imam Hussein, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, his daughters Zainab, Kulthum, and all the other family members that are there, they gather around him on his bed. And he gives what's called a wasiyah, a last will, a testament to them. And that's also something really important. We can prepare this ahead of time and write it, but to be able to deliver this directly, a wasiyah, this is basically your last words that you're going to be able to speak to these people before you die. As you can imagine, especially an imam, a ma'soom, is going to make sure that what he says is absolutely the most important things to say. In this wasiyah, Imam Ali Islam, he tells Imam Hassan to write this down, and he says that I want you to communicate this wasiyah, this testament, to all of the members of my family, even if they're not present, to all of my companions, and to all of my Shia, all of my followers in the future. I want them to see this particular testament and read through it. So what I like to do is every year on the anniversary of his martyrdom, I like to read through this, right, and fulfill his wish that we also see his last testament. So Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, he goes through and he first testifies and he declares his own faith. So one of the things that we want to do when we die is to have an opportunity to reaffirm our faith. Right? There's something called a talqeen. If you're fortunate enough to have someone help you to recite it while you're dying, that's excellent. Otherwise, in the funeral rites, if you've ever buried someone or been part of that, in the funeral rites we speak to the dead person. Right? So when we finish washing them and put their funeral shab on them, we do it once. Once we put them in the grave, we do it once. Once we finish burying them, we do it a third time. But what we do is we shake the body, right? The dead body, we shake him, and we say, listen to me, understand what I'm saying. And we call out the person's name, listen to me, understand what I'm saying. And then we go through and we say, when the two angels come and ask you, who is your Lord? Tell them it's Allah. When they ask you, who is your Prophet? Tell them it's Muhammad. When they ask you, who is your Imam? Tell them it's Ali, and we mention all the Imam's names. And then make sure that you affirm and you believe in the Day of Judgment and hellfire and heaven and all these different things. So we go through and we tell them all the important usul al-deen, all the basic tenets of faith, the things that we're responsible for. And we're reminding this dead person whose soul is still there. The body's dead, but the soul is still there. We're reminding them that these are the things you need to keep firmly in your mind, because the angels are going to come and ask you, and you have to have an answer on your tongue. And the answer comes from the strength of our faith here. It's not something you can have a cheat sheet and you just read off it and say, well, I believe whatever's on this piece of paper. Or I'm just going to say something even though I don't believe it. Once you die, everything's real. Here I can fake things. Here I can be a hypocrite. I can have no faith and I can tell you I have faith, or vice versa. Once we're dead, there's no more faking it. Whatever you are, that's what you are. If you have faith inside, then you can declare that faith truthfully. If there's no faith inside, you can't say anything. You're done. You're mute. So we want to make sure that we are solid in our faith, that we know God, that we know the Prophet, that we know the Imams, that we know about Judgment Day. All these different usul al-deen, they need to be something that we personally can say, I have conviction and I know that this is true. If we can't do that, then we need to work on that. Because if we die before we can know that, then we're in trouble on the Day of Judgment. We're in trouble, and not even on the Day of Judgment, in our grave we'll suffer. The grave is the first punishment. Right? For those who can't answer these questions, or those who have sinned and haven't taken the effort and haven't done the work to repent and to clear up their bad relations with people and ask for forgiveness, and have debts they haven't paid, and have favors they haven't thanked people for, any of those kinds of things, the first place we'll see punishment for all of that is in our grave. That'll be a minor kind of a judgment. So Imam Ali Islam, he reaffirms all of these basic tenets of faith as he's on his deathbed. Then he says that I advise you, O Hassan, all of my children, all of my Ahlul Bayt, and all of the believers, all of the Shia who follow you, of the following things. That you have taqwa of Allah, and that you don't die unless you're a Muslim.
Ya Allah.
Right? So the first thing he advises us to do is to have taqwa. Taqwa is fear of God. I think of it as the practical effect of solid belief in God. Belief is something cerebral, something that I know that God exists. I know that God is one. And then I accept it, I believe it. But then what does that do to me? How does that change me as a person? If my belief in God is solid, if I know Him, then I should fear Him as well. And if I fear Him, I should fear His punishment. I should fear displeasing Him. I should be conscious of everything I do and make sure that whatever I do is pleasing to Him, and I never do anything that's displeasing to Him. And so that kind of an attitude of constantly being conscious of God, always being aware and thinking, whenever I have a decision, do I do it, do I not do it? The question in my mind is, what does God want from me? Will God be pleased with it? Will He not be pleased with it? If that's the question in your mind constantly, and then you follow the answer to that, then that's taqwa. Having a consciousness of God, fearing God, being aware of what God thinks of you as you do something or as you don't do something, that's taqwa. And he says to make sure that you have this taqwa in your heart. And don't die unless you're a Muslim. Make sure, it's easy again to, some converts also experience this, they convert. That's relatively, and it has its own difficulty, that's relatively easy. But then being Muslim and staying Muslim, that is a harder thing. Right? Remaining on the path is the difficult thing. This constant prayer that we have in Fatiha, Ihdina Sirata Mustaqim, guide us on the right path. Sometimes we think of it as, Allah, I'm misguided, bring me into Islam. But then once you're a Muslim, once you're a Shi'i of the Ahlul Bayt, why are we asking for Allah to guide us? If I've already found guidance, if the guidance is in Islam, and the guidance is in the teaching of the Ahlul Bayt, and I've already found it, and I already believe it, and I've already done my best to practice it, why do I have to ask Allah to guide me to the right path? Because staying on the path is hard. Right? The path itself it's a straight path, Sirat Mustaqim, it's a straight path, but staying on it is very difficult. It's not, like if you think of a straight path, you think of like a big plain of land, and then everything's flat, and you have a big wide road, and that doesn't seem so difficult to stay on. But think of a mountain, with a little mountain, like a trail at the top of the mountain, where a step this way or that step that way means you end up down the mountain. And that's the Sirat Mustaqim, that's the straight path. There's some ahadith that describe it as sharper than the edge of a sword and thinner than a strand of hair. The staying on that kind of a road is very difficult because there's so many temptations constantly pulling us away from the path. Right? So we want to constantly make our effort to stay on the path until our dying, our last breath, so that we can die as Muslims, inshallah. Recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The first thing that he advises Imam Hassan and the rest of us is to stay unified. He says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Hold fast to this rope of God. And don't divide yourselves, don't become disunified. Right? So through your faith in God and through your allegiance to the Ahlul Bayt, and make sure that's the central thing that binds you together as people. I might have a difference with you about strategies, about some idea of how we should do things. And that should never come in the way of my brotherhood to you and your sisterhood or brotherhood to me. What binds us is something very important. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. All believers are brothers. So what binds us together is our common faith. The culture that separates us, the different opinions, the different ways of doing things that separate us, those are all minor things. Those are things that we can work out. As long as our faith is constant and we believe in the same things, then there should be nothing that can break us apart. And he says that's the most important thing I want you all to take away from this wasiyah, is to hold fast and don't divide amongst yourselves. and do whatever you can, not only to stay together, but if you see someone splitting off or someone causing some problems and dividing the community, you step in and do whatever you can to bring everything back together. So be a force for cohesion and unity in your community. Don't be a person to cause division and dissent. The second thing he advises us about is orphans. He says take care of orphans, and as long as you are alive, don't let there be a single orphan that suffers. Right? And he says the Prophet once said that if anyone supports an orphan until that orphan can stand on his own 2 feet and fend for himself, then I guarantee him paradise. The third thing he advises us about is the Quran. He says hold fast to the Quran and make sure that you are the first people to act on it. You as my followers, you as the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, right? You should be the first people to read the Quran, the first people to act on the Quran. He says don't let anyone else beat you to it. Another piece of advice he gives is with regards to salah. And be constant in your salah. Recognize that this is the best action you can do. And recognize this is the cornerstone of your religion. He describes it as a pole in the center of a tent. And the tent is your life. The pole is prayer. If that pole, which is prayer, if it bends, if it's pulled out, your whole life collapses. Nothing else matters. We have a hadith that's saying that on the Day of Judgment, Allah evaluates our deeds. The first thing He looks at is our prayer. If He sees that we've been conscious about our prayers, then He'll look to the other things. Then He'll look, okay, what about charity? What about good deeds to people? What about other kinds of acts that you've done? He'll entertain those and say, okay, we'll add that to your book of deeds. If your prayer is lacking, then you won't even look to the rest of it. So He wants us to be conscious of our prayer. Make sure that we pray it on time. Make sure that if we do miss it, then ask for forgiveness and make it up. Make the qada up. If you look back and there's a time in your life where you weren't praying, then go back and figure out how much you have to make up and make it up. But never do what's called istighfar. Don't take your prayer lightly. Because if you take your prayer lightly and say, no big deal, God will forgive me, it's not too important. I'm doing more important things. Right? Helping the poor, that's more important than prayer. So let me focus on that and leave the prayer. That's true, that's a good deed, but it's not at the cost of your prayers. Prayers have to be a cornerstone of our life no matter what we pray. Right? Even if you're incapacitated and you can't stand and pray, sit and pray. If you can't sit and pray, lie and pray. If you're on your deathbed, right, this is a kind of extreme example. We have a hadith about this, that if a person is drowning and prayer time has passed, they haven't said their prayer and they're drowning, the last thing they should do is make sure they pray. Make the intention, they're in the water, make the intention they're doing the ablutions, and then start praying as they're dying. And it's an extreme example, but that's the kind of seriousness. We might think, well, at that point you have an excuse. Allah will forgive you for it. You can't count on that. You need to make your effort first. Yes, Allah is forgiving. But we can't say, Allah is forgiving, so I don't need to do anything. We have to say, let me make my best effort, and I'm going to fail anyway, then Allah is forgiving. Yes, then Allah is forgiving. But I need to earn His forgiveness by proving to Him that I'm willing to do as much as I can, as ineffective as that is, as imperfect as that is. I'm going to do whatever I can to please You. As I fail, I need You to step in and lift me up and fix me and accept whatever little I do. Because worthless, it's only worthwhile because You magnify little deeds. You magnify a little bit of good and make it a lot. Otherwise, what I do myself is worthless. He advises us about the fasting in the month of Ramadan, about poor people. And with poor people, he says, "Sharikun fi ma'ishatikum." He doesn't say give to poor people or help poor people. He says make them partners in your livelihood. Right? If I have my own wallet, and then a poor person comes and I take a dollar bill out and give him some. I haven't shared my wallet with him. Right? What he wants us to do is put the wallet in front and say, hey, you take half, I'll take half. Right? To share our lives with the poor people and get them back on their feet, include them in our lives, incorporate them in our lives. Like share your life with them. Don't just. That's what the people of Medina did. One of the famous things about the people of Medina, when the Meccans came, they had nothing. Right? They had to leave behind everything. Many of them, they left their homes, all their wealth, all their belongings. And when they came to Medina, they had nothing. the Medinas were so devoted to the new cause that many of them, they split their belongings in half and gave half to their brother, their Meccan brother, and kept half for themselves. Right? They gave them part of their house, they gave them half their belongings, whatever land they had, they gave away whatever they could, right, for this new movement, so that that person who was a refugee now could have a life of his own, and he would be able to, make more for himself. All right. A few more. He says, take care of my family, the family of the Prophet. Right? Our relationship to our Prophet is manifest through our relationship with our imams. And right now, our living imam. The honor that we show to him is the honor that we're showing to the Prophet. Anytime we wrong him and we neglect him and we fail to fulfill our rights towards him, we're failing in our duty towards the Prophet. And so he says that make sure that as long as the Ahlul Bayt are amongst you, make sure that you take care of them and don't wrong them. Take care of your women, he says. Right? They're a responsibility for you as men. Make sure that you treat them well. And one of the last things he says is enjoin good and forbid evil. Right, this is one of the cornerstones of the village. When we think about prayer and fasting and these kinds of things, when we think about what are the Islamic duties, we'll think about these acts of ibadah. That's true, those are important acts of ibadah, but we're told in a hadith that actually more important than all of that is enjoining good and forbidding evil. Because if you don't enjoin good and forbid evil, then there's no prayer. If you see someone doing something wrong, one of our own brothers and sisters doing something wrong, and we stay silent, not only is that person committing a sin, but now I'm committing a sin because I'm not doing what I can to try to help the person. And so we have a responsibility. We can't have this kind of American attitude of everyone to each his own. Right? You do whatever you want, that's your business, and I'm going to stay out of it, and you stay out of my business. The Islamic culture is, no, if you're a Muslim, then you and me are the same. If you have a problem, I have a problem. If you're... The way it's laid out is as though we're a wall. The Muslims, the Ummah is a wall, and if one of us is weak, then there's a hole in our wall. Our wall is as strong as those weak links among us. And so if you're failing in your duties, then it's my duty to help you. And if I'm failing, it's your duty to help me. Recite wa salawat. One last story and I'll close. So for these 3 days, Imam Ali alayhi salam was in his deathbed. There's a companion of his named Asbagh. So Asbagh and many of the other companions, they were outside. They were used to being kind of Imam Ali's soldiers, his guards, and these kinds of things. They're always ready to fight, to defend. Whatever he wanted, they're always ready for it. Asbagh was one of those people. He was in charge of a special force that Imam Ali had created in his army. So all these, so imagine Imam Ali's inside the house, his family and companions or family is around him. These companions are outside, and they don't want to come in and bother the family, but whenever they hear that they are crying inside, they also can't help themselves, and they cry on the outside as well. After a while, Imam Hassan alayhi salam comes out, and he tells all the companions that Amir al-Mu'mineen tells you all, you should go home. Right? He's okay right now, and it's better if you go home, take care of your own obligations. So everyone leaves except for this one guy, Asbagh. So after a while, again, he hears some crying inside. He also starts to cry. Imam Hassan hears him outside, and he comes back and he says, Asbagh, I just told you to go home. Asbagh responds and says that I heard you. I want to obey, but my body's not obeying. My feet won't go anywhere. As long as I know that my master Ali is suffering, I can't rest. I can't abandon him. So then Imam Hassan says, okay, why don't you come on in, and we'll get permission from Imam Ali, and you can also come in and see him. So Asbagh comes into this room, and he says that when he looks at Imam Ali, he sees that there's a bandage around his head because he had been struck on his head, and it was all soaked with blood and pus. It was kind of a yellowish color, and he says that the face of the Imam also had lost its color so much that it looked yellow. And he says that I couldn't tell whether the bandage around his head was more yellow or the color of his skin, because he had become weakened so much. he speaks to the Imam a little bit, and then after a while he falls at the feet of the Imam and kisses them, and he begins to cry. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he reaches out to Asbagh and he says, Asbagh, why are you crying? You know that I am a martyr and I have paradise waiting for me. There's no need for you to cry for me. And so Asbagh's words to the Imam are that I'm not crying for you. Of course I know you're going to paradise. My tears are because I'm going to be parted from you. It's my separation from you. That's what causes me so much grief. Of course you are going to be fine, but now we're going to be lost. And where are we going to be without you as our Imam? Let us pray that Allah shower His mercy and blessings on the Prophet and on his family, especially during these nights. Let Him send His mercy and blessings on Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. Allah accept this meager act of devotion to you from all of us. Accept our fast during this month of Ramadan. Allow us to have strength to fulfill all of our obligations, including fasting, but all of the obligations that we have. Intercede for us on the Day of Judgment. Allow the Ahlul Bayt, especially Imam Ali to be our intercessors, and to stand between us and you and to beg for forgiveness for us. Allow us to be good and solid followers and supporters of the Ahlul Bayt in this life, and raise us in the ranks on the Day of Judgment. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah.
Salawat.